A friendly neighbor asking about your attic seems like innocent conversation. Just casual interest in your new home, right? But sometimes a simple question is actually a probe, a way to find out if you've discovered something you weren't supposed to find. When a man moves into a charming old house, his elderly neighbor shows immediate interest in one specific part of the property, the attic. He asks about it repeatedly with an intensity that doesn't match his casual tone. But instead of questioning why, the new homeowner dismisses his instincts and focuses on settling in. That dismissal nearly costs him everything, because hidden in the attic is a cache of stolen money, part of a decades-long embezzlement scheme. And the friendly neighbor isn't just curious, he's a criminal monitoring whether his secret has been exposed. This is a story about the questions we should question, the politeness that makes us vulnerable, and the warning signs we ignore because they come wrapped in a smile. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most trustworthy. Subscribe for more psychological mysteries that explore the moments when we should have known, but didn't. I should have known when my neighbor asked about the attic, but I didn't. Some questions seem innocent on the surface. Just casual conversation between neighbors, the kind of small talk that happens over fences and mailboxes. But sometimes, if you pay close enough attention, you'll notice that a question isn't really a question at all. It's a test, a probe, a way of finding out how much you know about something you shouldn't know about yet. My neighbor, Mr. Hendricks, asked me about my attic 3 days after I moved into the house on Birchwood Lane. I should have known then that something was wrong. I should have wondered why he was so interested in a part of my house I hadn't even explored yet. But I didn't. I smiled, politely, gave him a vague answer, and thought nothing more of it. That was my first mistake. The house was a colonial revival built in the 1920s, all hardwood floors and crown molding with that particular charm that comes from nearly a century of life. The real estate agent had called it a forever home, and I had fallen in love with it immediately. After years of renting cramped apartments in the city, the idea of owning a real house with actual rooms and space felt like a dream. The attic access was a pull-down ladder in the hallway. Ceiling. The inspector had checked it during the home inspection, noting that it was dry, well-ventilated, and structurally sound. I had glanced up there briefly during the walkthrough, just a quick look to see exposed beams and old insulation, nothing remarkable. I figured I'd use it for storage eventually, but 1 ton wasn't a priority. I had an entire house to unpack first. Mr. Hendricks lived next door in an identical colonial, though his was better maintained, with a manicured lawn and fresh paint. He was in his 70s, retired, the kind of neighbor who seemed to know everything happening on the street. He had introduced himself on moving day, bringing over a plate of cookies and offering to help if I needed anything. He seemed kind, grandfatherly, exactly the sort of neighbor you'd want. On the 3rd day, I was bringing in groceries when he appeared at the fence separating our properties. "Settling in all right?" he asked, his smile pleasant and warm. "Getting there," I replied, setting down bags to chat. "Still got boxes everywhere, but it's starting to feel like home." That's good, that's good." He nodded, then paused, his expression turning thoughtful. "Have you been up to the attic yet?" The question caught me off guard. Not because it was particularly strange. Neighbors ask about houses all the time, but because of the way he asked it. There was an intensity in his eyes that didn't match his casual tone. Like my answer mattered more than it should. "Not really," I said. "Just a quick look during the inspection." "Why, do you ask?" Mr. Hendricks smiled, but didn't quite reach his eyes. "No reason. Just curious. These old houses, they accumulate things over the years. Sometimes people find interesting stuff up there. Thought you might have explored it already." "Not yet," I said. "I'll get around to it eventually. Right now I'm more focused on the rooms I actually use." Of course. He nodded vigorously as if I'd said something profound. "Well, when you do go up there, let me know if you find anything unusual. I've lived on this street a long time. I might be able to tell you about the history of whatever you discover." I thanked him and went inside with my groceries, putting the conversation out of my mind. But that night, lying in bed in my new house, I found myself thinking about it. Why had Mr. Hendricks specifically asked about the attic? What did he expect me to find up there? And why did he seem so interested in knowing whether I'd been up there yet? I told myself I was reading too much into a simple conversation. Mr. Hendricks was just being neighborly, making conversation about the house. Maybe previous owners had found something interesting, and he was curious if the tradition would continue. Nothing sinister, nothing worth worrying about, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the exchange had been off. The next morning, I decided to explore the attic. Not because of Mr. Hendricks' question, or at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed to start organizing my storage situation. I had boxes of seasonal decorations and old files that needed to go somewhere, and the attic was the logical choice. I pulled down the ladder and climbed up, flashlight in hand. The attic was exactly as I remembered from the inspection. A long, narrow space with a peaked roof, exposed beams, and that distinctive smell of old wood and insulation. Sunlight filtered through a small window at the far end, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. There were a few items left by previous owners: an old wooden chair with a broken leg, some empty boxes, a rolled-up rug that had seen better days, so call an electrician, and opened the door. The basement looked exactly as it had before. Same boxes, same furnace, same concrete floor with its perpetual dampness. But as I descended the stairs to turn off the light, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There were footprints in the thin layer of dust on the floor. My footprints from the other day, leading to the furnace and back. But there was another set too, smaller, heading toward the far corner of the basement where I had stacked several boxes. My heart began to race. I tried to remember if I had walked over there recently, but I knew I hadn't. Those boxes contained old photo albums and seasonal decorations, things I had no reason to access yet. The footprints were fresh, disturbing the dust in clear patterns. I approached the corner slowly, my breathing shallow. The boxes appeared undisturbed, still sealed with packing tape. But the footprints circled around them, as if someone had been examining them from different angles. I checked behind the boxes, half expecting to find someone crouched there, but there was nothing. Just the cold concrete wall with its water stains and small cracks. I turned off the light and hurried back upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. For the first time since moving in, I felt genuinely unsettled in my own home. I spent about 20 minutes up there, mentally mapping out where could put things, checking that the floorboards were solid, making sure there were no signs of leaks or pest damage. Everything seemed fine, ordinary, exactly what you'd expect from an old attic. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd. Near the far wall, beneath the small window, the floorboards looked different, newer somehow. The wood was the same, but the nails holding them down were shinier, less corroded than the others. Someone had pulled up these boards and replaced them recently. I knelt down and examined them more closely. There were 6 boards in total, each about 4 feet long, forming a rough rectangle. The gaps between them were slightly wider than the gaps between the other floorboards, as if whoever had replaced them hadn't quite fitted them perfectly. I tried to pry one up with my fingers, but it wouldn't budge. I'd need tools. A crowbar maybe, or a hammer and chisel. Part of me wanted to go get tools immediately and see what was under those boards. But another part, the rational, sensible part, told me I was being ridiculous. So someone had replaced a few floorboards. So what? Maybe there had been water damage that needed repair. Maybe the previous owners had stored something heavy up here, and the boards had cracked. There were a dozen innocent explanations. I climbed back down and went about my day, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, trying to make the house feel like mine. But I kept thinking about those floorboards, and I kept thinking about Mr. Hendricks' question. That evening, I saw him in his backyard watering his garden. I walked over to the fence intending to ask him casually if he knew anything about repairs to my attic. But before I could speak, he looked up and smiled, that same smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Did you go up there?" he asked. "Not did you go up to the attic, or did you check out your storage space? Just did you go up there?" As if he already knew what I'd been doing. As if he'd been waiting for this conversation. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I went up this morning. Just scoping it out for storage. Find anything interesting?" His tone was light, conversational, but his grip on the garden hose had tightened. I could see his knuckles turning white. "Just some old junk the previous owners left behind," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "Why? Is there something I should be looking for?" Mr. Hendricks relaxed slightly, his grip on the hose loosening. No, just making conversation. Like I said, sometimes people find interesting things in these old houses." He turned back to his gardening, effectively ending the conversation. But I noticed he kept glancing at my house, particularly at the second floor, where the attic window was visible. I went back inside, feeling deeply unsettled. Something was wrong. Mr. Hendricks was too interested in my attic, too focused on whether I'd found anything. And his relief when I said I'd only found old junk had been palpable. Whatever was under those floorboards, he knew about it. And he was worried I might find it. I waited until the next day, a Wednesday, when I knew Mr. Hendricks had his weekly card game at the senior center. I'd overheard him mentioning it to another neighbor. I figured I had at least 3 hours. I gathered tools from my garage, a crowbar, a hammer, a flashlight, and my phone to document whatever I found. I climbed back up to the attic, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. The floorboards were harder to pry up than I expected. The nails were driven deep, and whoever had replaced these boards had done a thorough job. But eventually, I got the crowbar under the first board and levered it up. It came free with a screech of protesting nails. Underneath was darkness. I shined my flashlight into the gap and saw that the space below wasn't just the normal gap between attic floor and ceiling below. Someone had cut through the ceiling joists, creating a hollow space about 2 feet deep. And in that hollow space, there were things, boxes, carefully wrapped in plastic and sealed with tape. My hands were shaking as I pulled up more floorboards, revealing the full extent of the hidden cash. There were 5 boxes in total, each about the size of a shoebox, all wrapped identically. I pulled one out and set it on the attic floor, staring at it for a long moment before unwrapping the plastic. Inside was money, stacks and stacks of cash, bound with rubber bands mostly, 20s and 50s. I unwrapped another box. More money. I didn't count it, but there had to be tens of thousands of dollars hidden under my attic floor. My first thought was that I'd stumbled onto someone's life savings hidden away for safekeeping. But that didn't make sense. Why hide money in someone else's house? Why not put it in a bank? Unless the money couldn't go in a bank. Unless it was illegal. I sat in the attic for a long time, staring at the boxes of cash, trying to figure out what to do. The smart thing would be to call the police immediately. This was clearly money from something illegal. Drugs, theft, fraud, something. It didn't belong to me, and hiding it further would make me complicit. But I couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Hendricks, his questions about the attic, his intensity when asking if I'd found anything, his relief when I said I hadn't. He knew this money was here. He might have put it here himself, or he might have known the person who did. Either way, he was involved. And if I called the police, he would know I was the one who reported it. I lived next door to him. He knew my schedule, my habits when I was home alone. If this money was connected to dangerous people, reporting it could put me at risk. I was paralyzed by indecision, sitting in my attic surrounded by someone else's illegal cash, trying to figure out the least dangerous option. Finally, I took photos of everything, the hidden compartment, the boxes, the money, and carefully rewrapped everything exactly as I'd found it. I replaced the floorboards, hammering the nails back in as quietly as possible. If anyone looked, they might notice the boards had been disturbed, but hopefully not enough to raise alarms. I needed time to think, to research, to figure out the safest way to handle this. I climbed down from the attic and tried to act normal, even though my mind was racing. I made dinner, watched TV, went through the motions of a regular evening. But I kept the lights on in every room, and I checked the locks on all the doors and windows. 3 times before bed. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me tense. I kept imagining Mr. Hendricks sneaking into my attic, discovering that the floorboards had been disturbed, realizing I knew about the money. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps coming from above. Someone was in my attic. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. But then the footsteps stopped. Silence. I waited, barely breathing, listening for any other sound. Nothing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling, or an animal in the walls, or my exhausted, paranoid mind playing tricks on me. But I didn't believe that. Someone had been up there. Someone who knew how to get into my house without making noise. In the morning, exhausted and terrified, I went back up to the attic. The floorboards looked exactly as I had left them. The hidden cash beneath them was undisturbed. I checked to make sure. But there was something new in the attic. Something that hadn't been there before. On the old wooden chair with the broken leg, someone had left a note. Just a small piece of paper, folded once, sitting on the dusty seat like it had every right to be there. My hands shook as I picked it up and unfolded it. The message was written one and neat, precise handwriting. Leave it alone, for your own safety. No signature, no explanation, just a warning. Someone had broken into my house in the middle of the night, climbed into my attic while I slept, and left me a note. And I was certain that someone was Mr. Hendricks. I took the note downstairs and sat at my kitchen table, trying to decide what to do. The warning was clear. Whoever owned that money wanted me to pretend I never found it. And they were willing to break into my house to make sure I understood. But I couldn't just pretend I didn't know. I couldn't. Live in this house, sleeping above a cache of illegal money, knowing that dangerous. People felt entitled to break in whenever they wanted. I had to do something. I spent the day researching the previous owners of my house. The couple I'd bought from had only lived there for 2 years before relocating for work. Before them, the house had belonged to a man named Thomas Garrett, who had owned it for 15 years before dying suddenly of a heart attack 3 years ago. I found Thomas Garrett's obituary online. He'd been 62, unmarried, worked as an accountant. The photo showed a thin man with a receding hairline and a nervous smile. Nothing about him screamed criminal. But accountants knew how to hide money, and accountants might have clients who needed money hidden. I dug deeper, searching for any connection between Thomas Garrett and Mr. Hendricks. It didn't take long to find it. In a photo from a local newspaper article about a neighborhood association meeting, I spotted both of them. They were standing together, both on the association board, both smiling at the camera. They had been friends, or at least associates, colleagues on the neighborhood board, which meant Mr. Hendricks had known Thomas Garrett, had probably been in this house many times, had possibly even been the one to help hide the money in the attic. Everything clicked into place. Thomas Garrett had hidden money for someone, maybe embezzled from clients, maybe laundered for criminals. He'd hidden it, well, in a custom compartment in his attic. But then he died suddenly. The money had stayed hidden through the estate sale, and the next owners, who apparently never explored their attic thoroughly enough to notice the replaced floorboards. But Mr. Hendricks had known it was there. He'd probably been waiting for the right opportunity to retrieve it, or maybe he was under orders to keep watch over it until whoever really owned it came back for it. Then I bought the house. A new owner who might actually use the attic, who might discover the hidden cash. Mr. Hendricks needed to know if I'd found it. Hence the questions, the casual inquiries that weren't casual at all. And when I did find it, when I disturbed the floorboards, enough that someone noticed, he'd broken in to leave his warning. I felt sick. I was trapped in a house, containing evidence of a crime, with a neighbor who was monitoring me, who had access to my home, who had made it clear that my safety depended on my silence. I couldn't stay here, but I also couldn't just leave. The money tied me to this house, to this situation. If I sold and moved, I'd have to disclose everything to the new owners, which would expose the secret. If I just abandoned the house, questions would be asked. I was stuck, unless I could find a way to remove the money from the equation entirely. That afternoon, I called an anonymous tip line for the local police. I didn't give my name. I didn't mention my address. I simply said that I had information about possible illegal funds hidden in a property previously owned by Thomas Garrett, deceased accountant. I suggested they might want to look into his client list and financial records. It wasn't much, but it was something. A way of putting the information into official hands without directly implicating myself. Then I waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. Mr. Hendricks continued his routine, watering his garden, picking up his newspaper, waving pleasantly when he saw me. But I noticed he was watching my house more carefully now. I'd see him glancing at my attic window multiple times a day, checking if I'd gone up there. Again. On the 4th day, I came home from work to find police cars on the street. Not at my house, at Mr. Hendricks' house. I parked and watched as officers led him out in handcuffs. He looked older suddenly, diminished, his grandfatherly demeanor stripped away to reveal something harder underneath. He saw me, watching, and held my gaze for a long moment. I couldn't read his expression. Anger? Resignation? Warning? Then he was in the police car, and they drove away. I learned the full story over the following weeks, pieced together from news reports and gossip from other neighbors. The anonymous tip about Thomas Garrett had led police to investigate his financial records. What they found was a sophisticated embezzlement scheme spanning over a decade. Garrett had been stealing from wealthy clients, small amounts they wouldn't notice, funneling it into hidden accounts and cash stashes. Mr. Hendricks had been his partner, not just a neighbor, but a co-conspirator. Hendricks had been a financial planner before retirement, and together they had created a network of fake accounts and hidden assets. The money in my attic was just one of several caches they'd hidden in houses around the neighborhood. When Garrett died unexpectedly, Hendricks had been left holding the secret to these hidden funds. He couldn't retrieve them without risk of exposure, so he'd been waiting, watching, hoping for opportunities to quietly recover what they'd stolen. But my purchase of the house had complicated things. A new owner meant new variables, new risks. He tried to manage me through careful monitoring and veiled warnings. When that failed, when I found the money anyway, he'd panicked. The police found evidence on his computer, documents detailing the locations of various cash stashes, including the one in my attic. They recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars. In total, money that would be returned to the victims of the embezzlement scheme. Mr. Hendricks was charged with multiple felonies. At 73, he was facing the rest of his life in prison. I should have felt relieved. The threat was gone. The money was no longer my problem. I could stay in my house without fear. But instead, I felt a deep unease that wouldn't go away, because I kept thinking about that first conversation over the fence. Have you been up to the attic yet? Such a simple question, asked with a smile, in a pleasant tone by a neighbor I was supposed to trust. If I had answered differently that day, if I had told him I'd found something interesting, what would have happened? Would he have tried to befriend me more closely, to manipulate me into keeping his secret? Would he have threatened me directly? Would he have done something worse? I thought about all the times he'd been in my yard, all the times he could have entered my house when I was at work. The note he'd left in my attic proved he could get in whenever he wanted. What else might he have done? If I hadn't acted when the house felt different after that. I'd moved and looking for a fresh start, a place of my own, safety, and stability. Instead, I'd found myself living above stolen money, monitored by a criminal, threatened in my own home. Even with Mr. Hendricks gone, even with the money recovered and the threat eliminated, I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. I'd been a pawn in someone else's game, without even knowing it. The attic became symbolic of everything wrong with the situation. I'd been so focused on the obvious parts of the house, the beautiful floors, the crown molding, the charming architecture, that I'd ignored what was hidden. I'd accepted things at face value instead of asking questions. When Mr. Hendricks first asked about the attic, I should have wondered why. I should have been curious about his specific interest, his particular focus on that one part of my house. Instead, I dismissed it as friendly conversation. I'd ignored the warning sign because it came wrapped in a pleasant package. That's how these things work, I realized. The dangers we should notice most are the ones that seem harmless on the surface. The friendly neighbor asking casual questions. The innocent inquiry that's actually a probe. The smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. We're taught to be polite, to assume good intentions, to not be paranoid or suspicious. And people like Mr. Hendricks exploit that conditioning. They hide their intentions behind social niceties, knowing that most people won't question a kindly old man with cookies and a warm smile. I started paying more attention after that, not just to obvious dangers, but to the subtle ones. The questions that seemed innocent but were just slightly off. The interest people showed in things that shouldn't concern them. The patterns that didn't quite make sense. I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, even if I couldn't immediately explain why. I also learned about the previous victims of Garrett and Hendrick's scheme. Elderly people mostly, who had trusted them with their retirement savings. People who had been too polite to question discrepancies in their accounts, who had assumed the best rather than investigating. People who, like me, had ignored warning signs because they seemed too small to matter. One victim, a woman named Dorothy Chun, had actually noticed money missing from her account. She'd mentioned it to Garrett, and he'd assured her it was a paperwork error that would be corrected. She'd accepted that explanation because he seemed trustworthy, because he'd been managing her money for years, because questioning him felt rude. By the time she realized something was seriously wrong, tens of thousands of dollars were gone. Her story haunted me. How many warning signs had she seen and rationalized away? I lived in that house for another year before I finally decided to sell. It wasn't the house's fault, it was a beautiful home, exactly what I'd been looking for. But I could never quite feel comfortable there. Every time I walked past the attic access, I thought about what had been hidden above me. Every time I saw the fence where Mr. Hendricks used to appear, I remembered his too intense questions and his fake smile. The house had become a reminder of how close I'd come to being a victim myself. Or worse, because I'd been more than just a victim of theft. I'd been monitored, manipulated, and threatened. My safety had depended on my ignorance, and when I refused to remain ignorant, I'd been warned to stay silent. If I hadn't acted when I did, if I'd let fear control me, who knows what might have happened. Before I sold, I did one last thing. I went up to the attic and removed every floorboard from that section, exposing the empty compartment beneath. I wanted the next owner to see it immediately, to know that something had been hidden there. I didn't want them to go through what I went through, the discovery, the fear, the uncertainty about what to do. I left a note explaining the history, taped to one of the beams, along with copies of the news articles about Hendrick's arrest. Let the next owner know from the beginning what this house had been used for. Let them make an informed choice about whether they wanted to live here. Looking back now, I understand that the real danger was never just the money or even Mr. Hendricks himself. The real danger was my willingness to ignore the signs, to accept easy explanations, to prioritize politeness over caution. Mr. Hendricks asked about the attic, and I should have wondered why. I should have questioned his specific interest, his repeated inquiries, his barely concealed intensity. Instead, I dismissed my instincts because I didn't want to seem paranoid or suspicious. I didn't want to be the kind of person who sees threats everywhere. But there's a difference between paranoia and prudence, between seeing threats everywhere and recognizing them when they actually exist. The skill is learning to tell the difference. 2. Trust your instincts when something feels off, even if you can't immediately articulate why. So here's what I learned and what I want you to understand. Pay attention to the questions people ask you. Not just what they're asking, but why they're asking it. Notice when someone is more interested in your business than they should be. Trust your discomfort when something feels wrong, even if you can't explain it logically. Mr. Hendricks seemed like a perfect neighbor, friendly, helpful, concerned. But his concern wasn't genuine. It was calculated. His questions weren't casual. They were strategic. And if I had trusted my instincts instead of my conditioning to be polite, I might have recognized that sooner. Don't ignore the small warning signs because they seem too insignificant. A strange question from a neighbor might not seem like much in the moment, but sometimes those small signs are the only warnings you get before something much worse happens. I should have known when my neighbor asked about the attic. The question itself was the red flag I needed to see. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the warning signs you might be dismissing in your own life, subscribe to Should Have Known Stories. Hit that like button to share this message with others who need to hear it. And check out our next video where we explore another moment when someone ignored the signs until they couldn't anymore. Until then, stay aware. Trust your instincts. And always ask yourself why someone wants to know what they're asking about. The question behind the question is often the one that matters most.